After a huge cancellation crisis of 1985 and 1986, and interest in Doctor Who from the BBC hitting rock bottom, it was all or nothing for the 7th Doctor era to take off with the public. Did they succeed? Well, yes and no. Doctor Who was moved from its Saturday tea time slot to be put up against Coronation Street, which went about as well as putting an infant on the motorway and expecting them to make it to the other side. Despite the ratings being down, did the 7th Doctor era manage to pull off a new era of creativity and fresh ideas? Let's find out. Starting at, well, the very start, to no one's surprise here, we have number 12. Time and the Rani. No, it's a bottom-of-the-barrel story where not even the director or head writer is happy with this serial. Similar to the Twin Dilemma, Time and the Rani is a textbook example of what not to do when introducing a new Doctor. I understand you want to make the Doctor more impish and comical after the brash 6th Doctor, but you don't make the Doctor an utter idiot in the process. Time and the Rani is ludicrously, hilariously, reputation-destroyingly bad in the absolute extreme. The dialogue is horrendous, characterization non-existent, with a plot so preposterous and childish I'm surprised the audience isn't encouraged to scream, "He's behind you!" at every turn and angle. And I haven't even mentioned the absolute abysmal attempt at giving the 6th Doctor a regeneration. If you didn't have Colin Baker available, why did you even bother sticking Sylvester McCoy in a blonde wig? From there, the story devolves into lots of running back and forth, hammy overacting, over-the-top designs, and even worse effects. Much as you can tell that the production team is trying to make things work, it simply fails pretty badly, and this story is retro 80s camp in the worst way possible, with nothing substantial to back it up with. The Rani has now become a female master, before we ever got Missy in the new series, and the Rani is supposed to be an amoral scientist with no regard or interest for anything else other than her experiments and her work. Yeah, that's sort of the case, but she does things that the Master would have done in this story, such as threatening peoples for her own sake, disguising herself in bad over-the-top wig and outfits, and especially in her nonsensical plot that makes surface-level sense, but disintegrates the deeper you go into it. The design of the alien locutions is laughably awful, looking like 80s chicken men, and the actors in each role look bored out of their minds. Location shooting is dull, with lots of gravel pits and nothing interesting to look at, and the interior sets look cheap and forced out of desperation and time, despite this being the first story of the season. The action and pacing is uninspired and at times laughable, with just unnecessary pratfalls, confusing moments, and plenty of times where you just get a sense of wonder at how everything could have gone so horrifically wrong and bad. This story is such a staggering misfire on every single level, one that I would like to say avoid it if it wasn't so important to the show. This was an awful start to the 7th Doctor era, and I'm so glad it got better from here, but for being the only story on this list that I outright dislike, Time and the Rani rightfully wins, if you can call it that, the absolute bottom spot for this era. Number 11. Silver Nemesis. The 25th anniversary serial, this doesn't leave much to be desired, as the plot itself is a half-baked copy of Remembrance of the Daleks, with various parties such as the Cybermen, neo-Nazis, and a 16th century sorceress after powerful Time Lord technology. But where Remembrance of the Daleks works and Silver Nemesis lacks is that you could remove any of those villains and nothing would really change. Apart from the title, if you take out the Cybermen, because, well, there'd be no silver in the title. Nevertheless, the story moves at such a frantic pace that, whilst it may be hard to be bored, Silver Nemesis has no time to actually breathe, and would have benefited from being an episode longer, as the whole serial just comes across as a run around Windsor Park for 3 episodes until the statue wakes up. It's a pretty cool idea for an anniversary story where a certain MacGuffin that predates disaster and different villains converge, all claiming ownership. None of the villains complement each other or seem to be thematically tied together. On a positive note, what prevents this story from being a total disaster is the 7th Doctor and Ace. They both work marvellously together, whistling their way through the story, listening to jazz, and having fun throwing rings around the villains. This TARDIS team seriously carried the story. While they may be written more generically compared to their other 80s appearances, the redesigned Cybermen look terrific, and they look pretty epic, effortlessly massacring the Nazis. Shiny helmets and streamlined bodies look terrific. But aside from this, Silver Nemesis is pretty average. It's certainly not unwatchable, but if you're looking for a better version of this story, watch Remembrance of the Daleks, an average runaround in what is otherwise a pretty strong anniversary season. Number 10. Dragonfire. Often considered the best story of Season 24, I have to respectfully disagree. While it's not completely unwatchable, Dragonfire feels very average to me, and only seems notable as being the one that introduces Ace and where Mel leaves. Nevertheless, Ace makes a strong impact, showing she's far more than any other companion we've had before. A streetwise teenager with attitude and Nitro 9 to boast, the potential is most certainly there for her character. I find the sets and environments in this one cheesy but kinda nice looking, and they fit the tone and mood that the story is going for, even if there are some weird things here and there, such as the pure white costumes of the villains making them look like ice cream cones rather than evil villains. The mystery behind what's going on, especially with the dragon and its actual nature, is handled fairly well, and I didn't expect some of the twists it pulled, which was nice for a change. However, in the end, this story is very much all about the cast, and the changes it brings with the atmosphere and story feel more or less like an afterthought. The reappearance of Sabalon Glitz from the 6th Doctor era is a nice addition. It works pretty well, and Tony Selby's performance is great. It's nice to see Glitz back like this. The villains are pretty mediocre and forgettable despite some good performances, and it's just a fairly average treasure hunt that seems to prioritise introducing Ace rather than telling an engaging story. Dragonfire is pretty average, and whilst the future shows promise, we still have a way to go before the 7th Doctor era becomes truly exceptional. Number 9. Battlefield. Similar to Dragonfire, I never really got the hype surrounding Battlefield, maybe because the following 3 stories are pretty exceptional and this gets swept along with all the hype, or it could be the Brigadier back for his final appearance in Classic Who. But despite not being as good as the rest of Season 26, there's still plenty to enjoy in Battlefield. The idea of the Doctor being Merlin is a neat idea, and ties in nicely to the Excalibur and King Arthur legend. It's great to see an updated unit, and the Brigadier being called out of retirement for one last adventure is great to see, and Nicholas Courtney is such a delight in the role he played for 40 years. It's a story that blends past and future very nicely, with nostalgia for the older elements of the show very much present while looking ahead with the Doctor and Ace's characters. At this point, the 7th Doctor has made his full transition to a manipulating schemer, quieter and more thoughtful, with more of an edge to him than we'd previously seen, even to the point of trapping himself in his own machinations without much warning. It also touches on the Doctor's pacifism a little, which still seems a tad out of place even now, considering what the 7th Doctor will do in later adventures. It works to make this incarnation much more morally complex than he's ever let on. Sylvester McCoy continues to shine in the role. While Sophie Aldred as Ace doesn't get too much to do, again other than be her usual self, her chemistry with the 7th Doctor continues to be great, showing why they work so well as a team. The supporting cast is also a lot of fun, and the costume design is especially good, with the monster called the Destroyer looking surprisingly good for its time. Even the ending of the story is surprisingly warm, as the Doctor doesn't just leave immediately, settling down with dinner with old friends like some of the New Who Doctors got in the habit of doing. But overall, I don't think Battlefield is anything particularly great, and compared to the other stories of the season, it does stick out. However, Battlefield is still a comforting watch that relies more on nostalgia and tradition, and that's enough to recommend. Number 8. Delta and the Bannerman. If I want to watch an energetic story that feels complete and reminds me of warm summer days, I put on Delta and the Bannerman and just have a blast watching it. The serial boasts superb location work, a funky score, blissfully warm and colourful characters, and a charming, nostalgic atmosphere. It's full of sweet, silly moments and enjoys a more relaxed holiday atmosphere that makes it extremely addictive to watch in the right frame of mind. The Doctor gets to be thoughtful and dark, remain sweet, funny, and deal with a million problems at once and interact with people on a personal level. It's very much like Patrick Troughton at the height of his powers, having a ball with a script that allows him to really come out of his shell and show all of his facets, both focusing on the positive ones, and not just an inferior copy like he came across in Time on the Rani. Mel feels settled here as well, having a nice friendship with the titular Delta, remaining calm and collected rather than being the screamer that she's commonly known for in a crisis. Don Henderson's Gavrock is a pretty nasty and deadly serious villain, standing out as a truly unhinged killer amidst all the camp that Season 24 has to offer. Lush green Welsh countryside makes for a gorgeous backdrop. It adds a touch of authenticity, which is something this season desperately needed. The screaming ghouls, the blistering sunshine, the seaside resort, this is a story that screams of a holiday atmosphere. The detail that is given to the Shimmerans makes them a unique alien race. The pupating child, the hexagon cell fashions, royal jelly, singing sounds, the Vespidar theme is imaginative and realised fairly well. However, I don't really feel that the romance between Billy and Delta works, as there never seems to be any indication in performance or script that the two like each other, and especially not for Billy to become an entirely different species by the end. I only wish love was that easy. Furthermore, Kev McCulloch's music never really does much for me. This story is no exception, making the chasers come across as Benny Hill pursuits than anything. Nevertheless, if you're in the right frame of mind, Delta and the Bannerman is a ton of fun to watch. It's certainly not the best 7th Doctor story, but with witty dialogue, engaging performances, a great pace, imaginative notions, terrific location work, and an infectious sense of fun that everyone is having a whale of a time having, Delta and the Bannerman stands as a rock and roll adventure, but again is just so gosh darn fun. Number 7. Paradise Towers. I know it's popular to hate on this story, but for me Paradise Towers stands as my favourite story from season 24. Paradise Towers has all the hallmarks of what makes Doctor Who so great, albeit with some slightly camp stuff typical of 80s Doctor Who that does detract it a touch. Now the concept is a good one, and the social commentary underpinning it is well handled. Although most of the characters are fairly one-dimensional, the different groups are well thought out and creates an interesting world for the Doctor and Mel to find themselves in. The Doctor feels more defined here than he does in his debut serial, as the seeds are being planted for the Doctor to be a master manipulator. The way he escapes the guards by using the rulebook is certainly a highlight for me. Cannibal grannies are insanely sinister, and actually one of the more terrifying ideas of this era of Doctor Who. The scenes with Mel, although not without humour, are pretty creepy. The robot cleaners look like giant versions of what you might see on robot wards, and as henchmen they work pretty well. Richard Briers is great as the chief caretaker, coming across as a camp sadist who loves being in charge but cowers in fear when he's confronted with Croagnon, true architect and power behind Paradise Towers. Sadly, the whole thing kinda goes off the rails in part 4. Once Croagnon's motivations are revealed, it seemed like a rush to assemble all the groups of the tower block together to take out Croagnon, who sadly lacks any menace when possessing the chief caretaker, as the performance doesn't allow him to be taken seriously as a credible threat. And to no one's surprise, Kev McCulloch's music does nothing for me, coming across as a camp game show as opposed to threatening. Despite shortcomings, Paradise Towers easily stands as my favourite of season 24. The 7th Doctor era has truly begun here, and if you think this is the worst piece of TV you've ever watched, maybe watch more telly, you cowardly cutlet. Number 6. Happiness Patrol. Often associated with stories like Time Flight or The Twin Dilemma as one of the biggest missteps of the 1980s, but I don't think that's particularly fair. The Happiness Patrol is a perfect satire on Thatcher's Britain, and if you are a staunch defender of her, this won't be the story for you. The core concept of a deceptively nice government trying to stamp out unhappiness with their practices is broad enough to make it a satire on pretty much anything. It's a fittingly Doctor Who sort of plot, but Doctor Who never touched politics until Chris Chibnall apparently. Villains are fittingly camp, can still play into the point of the story, but feel like they have backstories and personality traits of their own. Sheila Hancock as Helen A is brilliant and feels like the sort of politician who's never felt sadness in her life, and you just want to wake her up from her deranged fantasy world. When the Doctor does this at the end, it's cathartic as hell to watch. David John Pope also gives a good performance as the Candyman, an incredibly bizarre idea for a villain that about works with the right costume design and performance. However, the set design comes across as fairly bland and misguided to me, and doesn't seem to fit with the style of story they're going for. The noir setting can have its place in Doctor Who. I feel the sets and production should have been more colourful to show off this supposedly happy world, to complement the ideas of the script more. The 7th Doctor era gets his chance to shine as a scheming trickster, and has terrific moments. The scene where he talks with the snipers at the value of taking someone's life is one of my favourite moments, and playing with the system's rules to bring down the government is delicious irony. If you're after a more serious political story, then you're probably better watching the 3rd Doctor era, but if you want the perfect mix of camp and darkness, then happiness will prevail for you here. Number 5. Ghostlight. Utterly bewildering on first watch, Ghostlight is one of those serials that was made for the home media age, and really rewards for repeat viewings. Doctor Who has often explored some very intellectual ideas, be they scientific or historical, in a very fun way, and Ghostlight is a really quirky way of exploring the theories of evolution. The story has plenty of atmosphere, evocative design, intelligent discussion, strong performances and a great monster reveal. Not bad for the final classic story ever made. Doctor Who has often boasted a stunning cast of well-known actors, but Ghostlight is the creme de la creme, and they have great fun bringing to life a household of sinister grotesques and enjoy the delicious dialogue within the script. It's a terrific story for the Doctor and Ace. The Doctor walks out of the TARDIS with an air of mystery, playfully trying to make Ace figure out where they are, knowing that she will be horrified when she finds out. He cuts a playful figure on the rocking horse, eyeing her furtively. He even asks if she has told him about Gabriel Chase, knowing that he has brought her here on purpose. He has definitely become a Doctor of mind games. When he says it is time to emerge, I'm not sure if he's talking about his role within the unfolding event, or about revealing his deception to Ace. Either way, the Doctor is very aware that he has a part to play in all this. Scenes between McCoy and Aldred after she realises where she is are the best acted moments either of them ever gave to Doctor Who. Ace can barely contain her anger, but manages to speak with a restrained fury, and the Doctor is purring with sympathy as he shows new dimensions to his character. Together they discuss something that is worth discussing, facing your fears and the horrors of racism. The Doctor growls that even he can't play this many games at once, for the first time admitting he finds all this horror a game. He has great fun sending light into a spiral of confusion by mentioning a menagerie of fictional creatures he has failed to catalogue. As Light says, he is unceasingly mischievous, but loving every second of it. Production design is stunning, with each set bursting with things of interest to look at. Cabinets full of treasures, deer, boar, zebra mounted on the wall, swords, lizard skeletons, organs in jars, birds stuffed on perches, an imposing portrait of Queen Victoria, butterflies in cases, beetles and blue bottles in the drawer. Ghostlight oozes confidence and charisma, and for being the last classic Who serial ever made, but not the last transmitted, this would have been a terrific way to end Doctor Who. It's still one of the 7th Doctor's finest stories regardless. Number 4. The Curse of Fenric. Quite possibly the crowning achievement of what script editor Andrew Cartmel wanted to achieve with Doctor Who, The Curse of Fenric is nothing short of wonderful. Whilst the plotting and pacing may be murky at times, this is certainly a highlight of the 7th Doctor era for good reason. Curse of Fenric sees many threads from the 7th Doctor's other stories come into play, in particular with Ace's past and what the Doctor was potentially building her up for. It also introduces the 7th Doctor's biggest foe in the form of an ancient evil called Fenric, and features logic puzzles, aquatic vampires, World War II soldiers, and a larger scale than we've seen so far. The script by Ian Briggs is ominous and mysterious right from the get-go, with many layers to it all building up to the grand villain reveal. Much of the setting and monster effects are also surprisingly intense, with the Hemivores and Fenric himself being some of the creepiest monsters the show has to offer, especially in the genuinely unsettling way stalk and attack people. It's really no surprise to say that this is one of the 7th Doctor's greatest TV stories by far, and the narrative really tests the limits of the 7th Doctor and Ace's relationship, as well as Ace's connections to her past and the 7th Doctor's power. Both actors give their all in their performances, with Aldred emotionally handling what feelings the story gives her, whilst McCoy's incarnation is at his most amoral and manipulative. There is a huge moment here where the Doctor has to literally destroy Ace's faith in him in order to save the day, and it's as heart-wrenching, brilliantly brutal as it sounds, but you never really feel like the 7th Doctor doesn't care either, despite the actions he takes, and his faith in the people he trusts takes full and centre stage. By the end, a surprise message of faith turns out to be the centrepiece of the story, which is surprisingly powerful to exemplify in a darker story such as this one, but to say any more would be to give away massive spoilers, and it's best for you to go into this with as little as possible. In short, while it's not as tight or exciting as Remembrance of the Daleks is, Curse of Fenric is the 7th Doctor's magnum opus on screen, and pretty damn close to a masterpiece. With powerful character development, tour-de-force performances, and a complicated but terrifying plot that makes full use of this Doctor's more amoral nature, this is one for the ages, and the best representation of what the 7th Doctor can do at his best. I would highly recommend the special edition version from 2003, as the extra time does allow this story to breathe, but nevertheless, The Curse of Fenric is pure class from start to finish. Number 3. Survival. Final classic Who serial ever transmitted. Whilst Rona Munro admitted she would have written something with more finality to it had she known it would have been the final story for a while, it still doesn't take away from how brilliant Survival is. Survival really encapsulates everything that Doctor Who was doing right in the late 1980s, and really shows the potential for stories that still exists with the leading pair, and this behind-the-scenes duo of John Nathan Turner producing and Andrew Cartmel script editing. At the same time, this story has some of the richest theming of the classic era, much of what unintentionally fits remarkably well with this story as a finale to 26 seasons worth of adventures, since it's well known that the team wasn't told that the show wouldn't be coming back until pretty much the 11th hour. Anthony Ainley puts in one of his best performances as the Master, and he realises he's put himself into a bit of a trap and is falling prey to the planet's primal instincts. He wears a new stripe of villainy while under the influence of the planet, and it's an even more brutal side to him than we've seen before, hell-bent on destroying the Doctor. I also feel that his final fate is left a bit up in the air, something I really appreciate, as well as the fact that he acts really well alongside Sylvester McCoy as well. It's much more of a serious performance from Anthony Ainley, which beautifully matches the darker edge Season 26 7th Doctor. Ace's friends are all solid characters, as Episode 2 leads heavily into the themes of survival of the fittest and the law of the jungle. These very themes reflect well on what Doctor Who's own struggle was in the 1980s, staying afloat with new BBC management and its fight to stay on the air. These themes also act as a vessel for Ace, as the script really examines what makes her as strong as she is, and whether that's all fueled by primal desires for a free and barbaric hunt. Sophie Aldred is just superb here, juggling between playing an Ace that wants to give in to those primal urges and live her life her own way, and an Ace who's willing to be more in tune with her emotions and wants to keep travelling with the Doctor. The Doctor does a wonderful job of keeping Ace grounded and on the right path back to him. Sylvester McCoy's and Sophie Aldred's chemistry as a pair has never been better here. The primal urge to survive is great throughout this, and would make sense for Ace going forwards. Even though it was hastily thrown together, I do love the final monologue at the end. Survival really does have everything. A great script from Rhoda Munro, rich with relevant and clever themes, absolutely gorgeous score from Dominic Glynn, really strong production and costume design, really strong production design for the Cheetah Planet, and a final face-off between a Doctor and a Master that are more perfectly matched than ever before, and an all-round group of great performers telling a great story. It feels like a special story and a momentous occasion. It's the end of an era. There's always that lingering thought that you're going to hate the episode that ended your favourite show on some level, but Survival does the task so masterfully that I can't help but adore it. Cheetah people aren't a complete disaster on a design level, but I wish they looked more primal and savage as opposed to looking like cute teddy bears at times. Nevertheless, for being the final classic Who story to end the series on such a high, Survival will forever be one of my favourite 7th Doctor stories for very good reasons. Number 2. Remembrance of the Daleks. What a difference 1 year makes. Remembrance of the Daleks is pure class from start to finish, and I've done a review and commentary for this serial, so I'll keep repeating myself to a minimum. It's one of those rare classic Doctor Who stories where the story is as great as the sum of its parts, and it never flags for its entire length. You've got an engaging guest cast, fantastic production values, an ambitious portrayal of the Daleks, lovely kisses to the past, heart-stopping action, twists and turns, and a Doctor and companion who seem made for each other. It works as both a monster tale, an examination of the Doctor, an all-out action adventure, and something far more adult and thoughtful. Andrew Cartmel has started to introduce some very strong ideas and themes into the show, from racism to genocide, a betrayal of love, and Ben Aranovich packs the story full of extremely quotable dialogue. It's a fantastic use of the Daleks and that we keep seeing them from so many different perspectives. For the Doctor, they're his greatest enemy and he's determined to wipe them out once and for all. For Ace, they are her first glimpse at alien aggressors on her travels and a genuinely formidable force. Scientists are thrilled at the prospect of getting to understand an alien life form, and the army sees them as racist sympathisers who will be the muscle for the Keep Britain White Party. And I love the way the Doctor just dives into the story and starts a conversation without introducing himself. This is a man who thinks it is his right to stick his nose in and makes no apologies for it. The way he spits human so contemptuously might just be one of my favourite line readings from the 7th Doctor. He's never felt more alien. The hints to an unseen past are superbly executed, and the idea of the Doctor being far more than just another Time Lord without revealing all the cards is perfectly done in the context of this story. Allowing Davros' own megalomania to destroy Skaro and talking a Dalek to death proves the Doctor doesn't need handheld weapons to win the day for the most part. Ace is exactly what the series needs at the times, a straight-talking, resourceful tomboy, the sort of companion you can imagine the Doctor wanting to travel around with. Finally, we've got a companion who doesn't just stand there and scream at the Daleks, and actually goes at them with a baseball bat, and her disgust with the racist attitudes of the past are masterfully subtle. Remembrance of the Daleks sees Doctor Who being more sure of itself than it has been for a while. It has proved to an increasingly doubtful audience that there was still a great deal for Doctor Who to give, even 25 years into its life. Number 1. Greatest show in the galaxy. Ask a fan what their favourite 7th Doctor story is, and very rarely they'll say this serial, but this will forever stand as one of my all-time favourites. The Greatest Show in the Galaxy proves that Doctor Who still has some surprises up its sleeves. The first episode dazzles with its creativity, stylishness and charm, and the last episode is a magical tour de force of stunning direction. With a collection of oddball characters, fun menaces and bursts of imagination, this story is like a throwback to the Graham Williams era at its very best. Given that 10 years have passed since that era, The Greatest Show in the Galaxy is wonderful commentary of the state of Doctor Who in the 1980s. Constantly under threat of cancellation from BBC management, low viewing figures and trying to please an easily angered minority of die-hard fans who complain it's not as good as it used to be, but they're still terribly interested regardless. Doctor Who creator Sidney Newman was quoted that Doctor Who in the 80s was being made by people who had no idea why they were making it. Taking that mindset and applying it to a long-running circus, having to put on shows day in and day out, is a wonderful metaphor that the serial explores with wonders. From the cheesy junk advertisement, to the encounter with the local stalls lady, to the campy yet sinister circus staff, the first episode puts in the legwork to set up the world effectively. Sylvester McCoy was often derided for making the Doctor a bit too silly, but the theatricality serves an important purpose to the story here, harkening back to the Troughton years of clownish exterior masking a scheming genius. Importantly, he is given opportunities in the scripts to display intelligence and experience. Ian Reddington is wonderful as the chief clown and rightfully won Best Villain in the Doctor Who Season Survey in 1988. Captain Cook and Mags make a remarkable parallel between the Doctor and Ace's relationship, and despite the hardships of the production, and that it was nearly cancelled and scrapped altogether, The Greatest Show in the Galaxy proves to be a wonderful story from start to finish, and rightfully ranked as my favourite 7th Doctor story. And whew, that's it. We've made it through the classic series. I'm so glad that Doctor Who proved it could still be creative towards the end of its life. Now if my numbers are correct, we of course should move on to the 8th Doctor. However, given that he only did one TV story and has a ton of Big Finish stories that I've barely made a dent in, I am unable to rank the 8th Doctor. So naturally we're going for the 9th Doctor next, right? Wrong. A couple of years ago, I did rank the whole of Series 1 of the revived era, which has all of 9 stories, and my opinion hasn't changed all that much, so check out the video if you want to know my thoughts on the 9th Doctor. So, due to the wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey nature of this series, we will be looking at the 10th Doctor next. Allons-y, and see you then!